Hello! Reviews of Godzilla King of the Monsters annoy me. A lot. The film is amazing, wonderful, a great joy to watch. Shameless plug, go watch my video, link in the description. After I watched the film for the first time in 2019, I went online to see what other people thought of it, and then quickly stopped looking at what other people thought of it. Years later, these reviews inspired me to make my very positive video on one of my very favourite films, but I didn't want to stop there. So in this video I want to go through why exactly so many YouTube reviewers were so wrong about Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Not that one, the other, that's it, that one, yeah. Before I get started, if you haven't already, click the subscribe button or I'll never get paid for all of this. Or if you want to, my Patreon is in the description. Now then, onwards with the video. In 2004, Godzilla Final Wars and the original 1954 Godzilla were released internationally. These two films were diametrically opposed, and yet they perfectly sum up people's opinions on the Godzilla franchise. Final Wars is cheesy, filled to the brim with monsters and monster fights, and a plot that falls into the "so bad it was good" category. I personally call the film Godzilla, Dragon Ball, Matrix, X-Men Final Wars because of how much of a genre mashup it is. In stark contrast, Godzilla is a dark film oozing thematic overtones and socio-political messaging. And yet, despite both films being relevant and fans of the Big G being accepting of them, it appears certain online personalities aren't. This had a significant effect when, in 2014, the American Godzilla franchise was rebooted and introduced the world to a new version of the radioactive monster. This new version was clearly inspired by and leaned heavily towards Godzilla, whilst also embedding itself heavily into the modern world, despite its fantastical nature. Personally, this film led me into a Godzilla renaissance. I had stopped watching the old films years before because I had got to that age where I thought I knew better about everything, and I thought Godzilla was silly kid stuff. Also because it was getting more and more difficult to get hold of the newer films. Seriously, Heisei and Millennium films are an arse to get hold of in the UK. But Godzilla 2014 sparked new life into a fascination I had forgotten I had. More, it enlightened me to a whole world of Godzilla I'd never known about, its greater themes and messages, all of which was wrapped up in a fantastically put together film. But despite how well made it was, how well acted, how well written, some fans were upset.
I've loved Godzilla ever since my mom brought home the American re-edited version with Raymond Burr included from the library when I was a little kid.
I have to do an intro to my Godzilla review because I love Godzilla so much.
Like many Americans, my first exposure to the character came from the 1998 movie, but I'm not going to claim to be any sort of expert.
At first glance, it would appear these admissions are so the reviewer can relate to fans or garner some level of authority from their more ignorant audience. However, after watching them back, these statements feel more like attempts to raise a protective shield before the backlash against their opinions begins. Every other reviewer of the 2014 Godzilla and subsequently King of the Monsters films provides a declarative statement as to what Godzilla films should be, each as vague and non-specific as the last.
The people who specifically only like the Japanese Godzilla films watch the Godzilla movies because of their satire and their political commentary. But the American Godzilla films, they just want to see Godzilla eat a building and like punch a monster. They don't give a shit about anything else sometimes.
Honestly, Godzilla films, they do a lot of human stuff, right? But then in the Japanese ones, they give you the payoff. You get to see battles intercut in between that, not intercut with the humans interrupting the battles every fucking time, but you get these big set piece sequences. Just Hollywood and the Americans don't fucking understand Godzilla, apparently.
After all, no one shows up to these things to see the boring scientists and military characters. We just want to know how the monster stuff is.
Because Godzilla was not made by Americans. Godzilla, and it does not translate all that great.
Yeah.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters might be the first American-made Godzilla flick I've seen where I can say, yeah, this is a proper kaiju film right here. Makes me think, oh, there might actually be somebody in Hollywood who gets it.
If you're a Godzilla fan who wants to see some Godzilla fan service, who saw the previous Godzilla movie and you're like, and I want to see more Godzilla, this movie's going to give that to you. But that is classic sequelitis, right? It's like it gives you more, but bigger isn't always better.
This leads to one of the biggest problems I have with Godzilla reviews. There are few objective opinions and many presupposed ideals. They have ideas in their heads about what the films should be, and often discuss not what was good or bad about the film itself, but what was good or bad about the film, mostly bad, in contrast to other films and their ideas. One particular reviewer stated that Godzilla is meant to be silly and fantastical, therefore the films shouldn't take themselves seriously.
But not as much fun as Skull Island.
No, I agree.
Even though Skull Island was sillier, but
these movies they're giant monsters fighting. They're silly. Yeah. They're supposed to be kind of silly. And this movie, that's
to a certain degree. To a certain degree, yeah.
But this movie was so dead serious. Oh, this is what would happen if Godzilla was really doing this. Yeah. It's like, okay, but Godzilla isn't really doing this. Yeah. Show me a fantasy world. I want to have fun in this movie.
Oi, mate, got a sign here you might like. Simply put, these people say, I think the film should be like this. Film wasn't like this. Therefore, film bad. This is particularly frustrating considering this is a reboot, a remake, an adaptation. Adaptations are likely to be different, otherwise what's the point of making them, and should therefore be judged on their own merits as much as in comparison to what came before. But reviewers seem to miss that first part. When King of the Monsters was released, it had plenty of hurdles to overcome. It had a choice. Keep going on the path set out for it by the 2014 film and fans of the darker political side of Godzilla, or swerve into the field full of member berries that the critics and fans of cheese wanted to drive through. When watching King of the Monsters, you realise it did both. There's more Godzilla, more monsters, more action. It's fantastical, it's cheesy.
Alright, which way to the hangar? I can show you. Anybody else?
At the same time, it's grounded, it's dark, it's socio-political, it's strongly thematic. King of the Monsters is doing all these things and more, trying to please everyone at once. It does a pretty bloody good job of it too, if you're paying attention to it. Reviewers focused on Godzilla and Co, but as one reviewer put it, there is the rest of the film to talk about, which of course means the human element. Confusing, messy, overcomplicated, boring, and the incredibly substantial I don't care are used to describe what happens with the people in King of the Monsters.
So guys, in the end, Godzilla King of the Monsters has some enjoyment in it, but the plot was kind of sloppy and messy throughout. It's like they were like, let's have monsters fight. We'll just kind of build a bit of a plot around it. Does it work? Kind of. But monsters fight.
I don't care about the characters, the acting, whatever. The plots, I don't care about.
So you agree? What the hell? Nobody gives a crap about the humans.
There was, yes, a lot of human characters. Yeah. And I feel like there was way too much exposition in this movie. Mm-hmm. Every scene with the human characters is just explaining plot to you. And
it's them sitting at a table or at a computer.
Or in a surveillance room.
Yeah. You need some human stuff to break up the action and pacing, but they just went too far into it.
Felt like this felt like the movie was just about the people and about these like scientists and government agencies and all these things with monsters fighting in the background is what it felt like to me.
King of the Monsters is about Godzilla fighting a bunch of other monsters. Some boring human characters do some boring human stuff too.
The spectacle that come with these creatures is jaw-dropping. It's easily the best part of the movie, and it's highly satisfactory whenever stuff with them is going on. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff with some really boring-ass people, too. And if you thought the human beings in Gareth Edwards' Godzilla weren't fleshed out well, you are going to be bored to tears with the people in this movie because they are just there to give exposition.
And it spends more than a little time focusing on the human characters that we really don't care about. Or at the very least, I don't.
The cast mostly gets short shrift when compared to the monsters, with Chandler's character spending most of his screen time stressed out, Brown's crying more often than not, and Farmiga's, well, let's just say her character's motivations are confusing at best and ridiculous at worst.
If you've watched my video, you'll know that there is an incredible amount of work put into, well, everything. In context, the human plots are incredibly well put together and well translated to the audience. So when I hear, the humans are dumb, I want to know why someone thinks that. The problem is, more often than not, the human characters are given so little attention by reviewers that they are simply labelled and ignored. The few times they are talked about and opinions are evidenced, I feel like Jake Skywalker.
You see these humans, there was not one point in the entire movie where the humans did anything effective.
But then the Argo flies in, shooting the shit out of King Ghidorah, because the humans are weirdly effective in the American-made Godzilla movies, and Ghidorah flies away.
Then there's this main character who's a wildlife photographer who knows how to fix fucking everything. He's like, this doesn't work. Oh, I'm gonna go fix it. It's like, dude, you're a dude. You're just some dude you've never been on a sub before. Never. You're gonna fix the weapon system? Fuck you.
Apparently, no one paid attention. I've talked about it in my other videos. Hell, I dedicated a whole video to it. But the YouTuber Mauler did a watch together of King of the Monsters, which is still available on his second channel, Moolah. It stands as my go-to example of how these reviewers must have watched the film. I.e., Mauler complains he doesn't know what's going on, in doing so, talking over what's going on, so he doesn't know what's going on.
I know what the hell it is. I helped build a prototype.
Don't they know that?
Who is he?
Sam Coleman.
Wouldn't they know that?
I thought that was the whole reason they came to him.
Rags talks about how long it's taken to get to a fight, then talks about how long it's been since the last fight.
I'm entertained. I cannot wait for the monster fight that will occur in 25 minutes.
And Gentle Cum Handler mocks every other utterance and then laughs at his own jokes, drowning out what's happening.
Set them free. You are murdering the world. No.
You are.
No, because...
I can imagine the reviewers of Godzilla King of the Monsters doing something similar, i.e., not paying attention until Godzilla or another Titan appears on screen, completely missing everything else that's going on and why it's so bloody good. Funnily enough, Mauler does try to understand the plot.
They wake up King Ghidorah. I don't know specifically why. I'm pretty sure they say they just like want to get King Ghidorah up and running. But do you remember at one point in this film, a lady scientist is like, the plan was to wake them up one at a time, but King Ghidorah fucked everything up because he's the only one who can wake up others. He like screams at them and they wake up. And do you remember King Ghidorah also happens to be an alien? Like while the rest of them were born on Earth or something? I was just like, were they just unlucky? They just woke up the one that could wake up all the other ones? It's like, damn.
He nearly gets there, piecing together what he's garnered in his watch through, but he's lacking pieces of information that he's either glossed over or talked over. This is what I would expect to happen if I sat one of these reviewers down and asked them to try and explain King of the Monsters to me. They either know everything they need to know and just didn't put the pieces together, or they completely missed details because they weren't paying attention because there wasn't an explosion on screen. One of the more frustrating things to hear is the one example everyone uses to describe the dialogue. Keep in mind the examples I used in my video where they talk philosophy or methodology or motivations or literally anything else. Reviewers apparently only watch the trailers because they all reference Stanton and that one specific line as an example of the whole film's dialogue.
And I think this movie has a bit of identity crisis. Some of the dialogue is laughably bad in that way where you're like, but maybe it's supposed to be cheesy. There was a line, two people make this line in tandem. It's like this: oh my God, Zilla. I mean, it's in here. And that's not even the biggest one that makes you like, are they doing this on purpose? But it doesn't commit to that. So you don't know if they're trying to be a cheesy 90s action movie or they're trying to elevate the genre somehow.
I would say for the most part, the human characters were better.
I'd say I didn't mind maybe 3 characters out of the several that were in the movie. The other ones made me want to die. Especially the scientist guy.
Oh, the white-haired scientist. He's not a bad actor, but in this movie was awful.
He was just, every line was so annoying. Like, he just always had to have some awful one-liner. And the
it's like
part
the,
where
oh my god, Zilla.
Zilla.
Oh god,
it was painful. And the every line out of his mouth.
I wanted more monsters, absolutely. But if you're going to do the thing where you're like, look, I want to have a monster movie with dialogue that matters, make the dialogue matter. It didn't matter. It was stupid. You had bad comic relief.
Oh, yeah.
Really bad comic
None of the jokes are funny. None of them. Not a single one made me laugh.
I didn't even know there were jokes. I thought it was
there
just
were
serious.
jokes.
Yeah, they tried.
I guess I missed them.
Oh.
Yeah.
Went right over it. Yeah, right, because they're so poorly executed that you're like, was that a joke or is that guy just a weirdo?
He's a weirdo.
Yeah, he's a weirdo. They have a scientist. The side characters, every single one, except for the Japanese scientist guy, I forget his name, is shitty.
I don't suppose your family has any tips on slaying dragons, do they?
Slaying dragons is a Western concept. In the East, they are sacred, divine creatures who brought wisdom, strength, even redemption.
Stanton says 3, maybe 4 things in the film that are cringeworthy.
My God, Zilla.
Get it? Well, Sarazawa let him fight action. I used to love it when he said that. Open the shields. Oh, yeah, sure. Let's bring him in for a beer. You out of your goddamn mind? Hangar doors are unresponsive. All right, which way to the hangar? Come on. Hope you got a big wrench.
But 4 lines totaling less than 30 seconds of screen time are not a 2-hour film. Other characters are sometimes mentioned in these reviews, but with the same vagaries as the human plot. And then there's the comments about Mark Russell.
I feel like the human characters are a step down this time around, as the only guy that really got any major focus was Mark, and boy oh boy was this motherfucker a Gary stew and a half. Kaiju films tend to have your handful of experts who have plans, the plans fail or partially succeed, and it all comes together somewhere around Act 3 when the people learn to put aside their differences or what have you. Here, though, it's all Mark all day. He's the expert in everything, because he is. Mark's a wilderness photographer, wildlife expert, marine biologist, computer scientist, mechanical engineer, military tactician, madman of skill beyond anyone around him, and it really stands out. Mark can do literally anything under the sun. Track kaiju, help invent kaiju-controlling boom boxes, outthink the greatest military minds of the world, work military equipment better than the military can.
Then there's this main character who's a wildlife photographer who knows how to fix fucking everything. He's like, this doesn't work. Oh, I'm going to go fix it. It's like, dude, you're a dude. You're just some dude.
The father is just the most generic character.
I hate Godzilla because I hate him.
I hate
him more than anything.
Kyle Chandler in this movie, and this dude does everything. He's not one note, he is literally everything. He knows a lot about this piece of tech, he's along for the ride. If there's an away team, he's on that away team. Anyone has a question about something, he has the answer. Anyone has an answer to something, he has a counter that's actually the correct answer. If there's a military tactic that needs to be decided in a room full of military personnel, including commanders and the like, he's the one who's gonna be like, no, don't do that. Do this other thing, because I know better than you do. And they're like, all right.
This is a major character that the film goes out of its way to fully explain, both in terms of skills and relationships. And yet, these reviewers don't know who he is, or make shit up to cover up the fact they don't know who he is. A Gary Stew who failed to save his son at the start of the film, amongst other failings. A man who fixes everything despite fixing one thing? A man who has an answer to everything despite being at a complete loss about his situation multiple times and even seeking advice. Did they watch this film? Simply put, the major issue that a lot of reviewers had about King of the Monsters was the human element, but the complaints about the human element are either uselessly insubstantial or wrong. Worse, when referencing the human characters, they offer the wonderful statement, I don't care. FYI, if you hear someone say I don't care and they don't substantiate their reasoning, i.e., I don't care about X because it's not relevant to Y, then you should stop paying attention to that person. If they can't be bothered to care about a subject, why should you care about their opinion on it? One more thing about the human side of the film before I move on. Whatever the reason may be, probably they weren't paying attention to it, reviewers constantly get the family drama wrong.
Like the 2014 film, their family drama is the least compelling aspect of the film, and feels kind of forced amidst all the more pressing global-scale drama going on around them.
Godzilla King of the Monsters stars Kyle Chandler, Vera Farmiga, and Millie Bobby Brown as a splintered family that gets swept up in the drama when a new array of giant monsters begin to appear around the world.
Tons of monster fights. Oh, but I guess we have to have a human element. So we have the most...
The family drama felt very Roland Emmerich.
And then the movie never really does anything to flesh them out or make them much more interesting. It's boring, cliche melodrama stuff, but at least I understood it.
What every single reviewer misses is that the family drama is the monster drama. One causes the other. They are inherently intertwined. I think it says a lot about the quality of these reviewers when they completely miss such a foundational plot point. But then, you know, big monsters go smashy smash, right? Majoritively, the monsters are praised in King of the Monsters, but there are complaints that are interesting. Some reviewers, especially self-proclaimed Godzilla fans, declare the fights are short and or that the monsters are barely on screen.
You want to see more monsters and you want to see Godzilla more, which is why you should be on my side, because they try to offer you that and they know you want that, but still they're cutting away from the fights. You're putting up with so much crap in order to get the good parts. And when Godzilla shows up, gives Godzilla the beat down and make him look like a badass, but we're going to focus mostly on the human characters.
The monsters begin and end the film and fill up a considerable amount of screen time in between. In terms of fighting, the last fight alone takes up most of the third act, almost to the end credits. When reviewers proclaim there's barely any time with monsters on screen, this is potentially down to two things. One, those pesky presuppositions I mentioned earlier where they have an idea of how much time the monsters should be on screen for. Or two, they aren't paying attention to the human moments, therefore aren't being entertained, therefore are bored, and the times between monster parts seem longer. I could make my own self-imposed declarative statement about the monsters and their fights, but ultimately, it's entirely subjective. This is evident by some reviewers being happy with the amount of screen time the monsters get, or, in at least one case, being upset they get too much.
Yeah, you see more fighting in this movie, but whereas the last Godzilla movie, there was a build-up, and you're like, oh, we didn't see him, and again, with the airport, the foot at the airport, I was like, I wish I saw that fight. I don't like seeing the aftermath. Undeniably, though, by the end of the movie, there was a lot of payoff, because you're like, finally, we're seeing that thing that's been built up all this time, and there's a huge release with it. This movie, by the end, you're like, monsters fighting. I've seen it.
Granted, I think this is the same reviewer who said you don't get that sense of scale that you should get from watching giant monsters on screen, and I think I probably should have put this complaint in the "Did you even watch the film?" section.
In the 2014 Godzilla movie, Godzilla moved really slow because the bigger something is, the slower it appears to move. In this movie, Godzilla and the other monsters, they're very quick and nimble compared to how big they're supposed to be. It just makes them look smaller than they should look.
They do this constantly where they want to show the monsters fighting in the background because they want to show you these human characters. And I'm straining.
I think they want to show you like the scale of it. It's
Yeah.
like, stop it! We know the scale! There's buildings right next to them!
I also heard complaints that there wasn't enough destruction in King of the Monsters, which, what?
The next thing I wanted improved was more things getting destroyed on camera.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think this one dropped the ball again because I think the Godzilla movies aren't just about the monsters, they're about the destruction. That kind of makes it in your mind where you start to just imagine if this was a real situation, and you don't see any of that really. I mean, maybe very little, but when Rodan comes out of volcano, you see people running, like there's some of that in there, but for the most part, it's just the monsters kind of isolated in these barren, dark
wastelands of
rainy,
just
yeah.
The
Or,
thing is,
or
Rodan,
if they are in the city, there's a giant storm happening that's covering it all.
Rodan was the only one that you actually see the way, Rodan flies, buildings to get destroyed.
Yeah.
Everyone else was buildings are already destroyed.
So yeah, that was a major complaint of mine, is that not enough structures get destroyed, not enough destruction.
The one thing I'll say to go back to what you were saying earlier about like there wasn't enough destruction, and this is a mild spoiler, but there's a scene where they're fighting in Boston, and Boston hasn't been touched yet. It's completely fine. Ghidra comes in, lands. All of Boston's destroyed within 1 or 2 minutes of that landing, and you don't see it happen. It just is done because the whole thing is Ghidra has a giant storm around him at all times that he can just make.
This is what a Godzilla movie is. Here's a building. Here's the monster walking up to the building. Boom. Watch the building crumble. Slow. Wow, look at the destruction. Look at the people run. Oh my God. Imagine this. There was none of that.
Were fighting.
Then there's the complaints about the monsters being in the dark. Well, specifically fighting in the dark, but I'm going to include monster scenes in general.
There's not like one complete fight where you can see in its entirety without a bunch of fucking ash and storm and night and dark covering it all up.
Next item on my list, and my biggest complaint that this did not rectify, the first movie, the only time you see the monsters fight, they're in the dark, in the rain. I'm so sick of seeing that.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the only time the monsters fight is in the dark, in the rain,
or in water.
It's like
in water.
Either, it's in like they're in an ocean or like. They did improve the visibility. Like in 2014, there are parts where you can't even watch it. It's so dark you can't tell what's happening, unless you watch the 3D version. It's a little bit brighter. So this one I didn't have any visibility issues. I could still see what you were meant to see.
Yes, they are sometimes in the dark, but you can see them, so what's the problem? On top of that, the darkness enhances specific effects, which as far as I'm concerned is a stylistic, artistic choice that works. And bloody hell, some of the shots of the monsters are amazing, darkness or no. To say monsters in dark therefore bad is incredibly misleading, or, once again, is a result of not paying attention. And there's complaints about the fights being cut off and the audience barely getting to see anything, which, no, sod off with that.
and then all the planes fly in and stuff, and it's this really cool shot, and then all of a sudden that big ass plane that they fly in just takes up the whole screen and covers the fight, and that's how the entire movie felt to me. It's, you want to see them fighting this entire fight, but all you keep seeing is they hit each other, cut to the dude, hit each other again, cut to the airplane people yelling about shit, hit each other again, cut to whatever else character. Like, you never see a full fight.
But somehow, even though there's more fights in it, somehow they still find a way to cut away. How do they cut away? They constantly cut away to the human characters. Stop cutting away from the monster battles to focus on the humans running around doing their stupid drama.
This is a complaint carried over from the 2014 film, in which the monster action was occasionally cut off to see what the human characters were up to. In King of the Monsters, there are a few times the fights are cut away from. There are also times when the monster action is interwoven with the human events, incredibly immersively so. There's times when monsters and humans are interacting, so you have to go between the two. And there's also times when the monsters are center focus, with the humans being ignored for long stretches of time. I've brought this up before in another video, but I'm going to again, if slightly differently. Ip Man, the martial arts spectacular, has some great fight scenes in it. In my other video I referenced the 10 vs 1 fight, but I'm going to reference another one now. This fight earlier in the film is a great display of prowess, and I always remember it going on and on for some time. But how long does it actually last? "4 minutes, including the times they stop, of which there are several. If I didn't include them, we're looking at something like 2.5 to 3 minutes. Suddenly, a reviewer complaining that the monster fights in King of the Monsters aren't long enough, when one uncut section of the enormous fight at the end of the film is as long or longer than a martial arts film fight scene, is bollocks. I'm starting to see the problem. Reviewers aren't watching half the film. King of the Monsters has everything these reviewers want. Long contiguous fight scenes, environmental destruction, realistic depictions of scale, cinematic camera angles, clearly visible and easy to follow combat, a story that puts the monsters at its center. But King of the Monsters, along with 2014's Godzilla, also have elements reviewers don't like, such as integrated family drama and social political storytelling, even though both can be found throughout Godzilla's cinematic history. These reviewers either don't know or conveniently forget this fact, so when such elements show up, they don't pay attention to them, effectively blanking half the runtime. This explains why they are so wrong when trying to talk about them, and why they think there's such a huge time gap between monster scenes. If a monster isn't in view, they're, no idea, picking their noses? But if they actually, did their jobs and watched the whole film, they wouldn't be complaining about the lack of monsters so much. They'd be entertained by the so-called dumb, complicated, boring, messy, human drama that expertly links to the monster drama and the themes of the film. Alas, it appears they went in ready to hate on the people in the film, so they're basically a lost cause. But it's not all doom and gloom. Not all the reviews I watched about Godzilla King of the Monsters were entirely negative. There were some that had nice things to say, and even a few reviews that were entirely positive. Even more surprisingly, the positive reviews were from unexpected sources. Anyone who's watched my Great Joy video might remember these little nuggets. In this respect, there is actually what is known as a doubled narrative tripling, with the Titans leading the action and humans acting as mouthpieces. Godzilla wants to save the world, Ghidorah wants to destroy it, and the government wants to save the world by destroying something. The actions of these monsters are then represented and bolstered by their human counterparts. Alan Jonah and his terrorist cohorts work towards establishing the natural order, whilst Ghidorah is seen as just one more Titan. But as Ghidorah begins to destroy the world, Jonah reveals he is more than happy to let it happen. The only thing really missing from King of the Monsters, in this regard, is the presence of the eco-terrorists at the Boston battle, perhaps trying to keep the Orca out of Monarch's hands, as Goji and Ghidorah rage overhead. When I wrote these down, I wasn't sure if I would keep them, as they are a bit beyond my usual scope of reasonings. It wasn't like I was making them up or something. I had seen them in the film and could point to evidence of their existences. Even so, I was worried about including them in the video, but in the end, in they went. So having put these points in my Great Joy video after all my deliberations and insecurities, imagine my surprise when I saw this.
However, the reason I do think this movie does stand out is due to the way it handles itself narratively, how it somehow manages to seamlessly connect the human element with the monster element, in a way that clearly showcases that they're not that different. Here, the term monster doesn't mean just these massive ancient titans. Here, monsters also come in human form. Look at the main villain Alan Jonah, and you'll quickly notice that he basically is the human equivalent of the main titan villain, Ghidorah. He's an uncaring, ruthless beast who brings chaos and ruin everywhere he goes. Even though these two goals vary in minor detail, essentially they're the same thing. Same destination, same ultimate objective. But they are still two different goals actively pursued by the two different parties. This time, neither party is just reactively following the other. Same with the villain goal. For Jonah and his men, the main objective is to awaken all the sleeping titans so that they can take over the earth and restore it to what it used to be. And what is the objective for Ghidorah? To awaken all the titans to take over the earth and restore it to what it used to be. Again, the minor details can vary a bit, but essentially both villain parties are pushing the exact same overall villain plot. And toward the end, Jonah even ultimately fully conforms to the mentality that Ghidorah represents. The only gripe I have with this final battle is the fact that the movie leaves Jonah out of it altogether to use him for shameless sequel bait.
We'll take it.
To put it plainly, shouldn't we have a league of our own?
Instead, he should have been there to represent the human side of the villain plot. As Ghidorah is fighting Godzilla, he would be there holding Madison as hostage and fighting Mark in order to stop him from using the Orca. This way, we could have had the same battle of hero versus villain, but done on two different layers, which at least for me would have been a step up.
That's just weird. Or it would be if not for high objectiveness. That might sound a bit pretentious, so let me explain. Most opinions can be separated into subjective and objective. This isn't a sliding horizontal scale, but a wheel in which sit high and low opinions. Let me give you an example. 4 men walk into an art gallery. I swear this isn't the setup of a joke. They stand before a solid green painting and are asked to give their opinions on it. The low subjective and low objective men say it looks green. When pushed, the low subjective answers green field, whereas the low objective answers green canvas. The high subjective will then wax lyrical about a treasured memory of walking through a meadow of high grass on a windy spring morning, pointing out how the brushstrokes make the green look windswept and the random globs of paint look like morning dew. The high objective will point out a lack of pattern in the brushstrokes and their large size, the lack of variation in the colour, nor any attempt at making shapes, concluding this was the work of a lazy artist buying a pot of paint off the shelf and slopping it on a canvas without any care for artistry. Each opinion is garnered from the same piece of art, but vary greatly in direction and depth. Low opinions, subjective or objective, are so vague as to be almost universal, if worded slightly differently each time. I'm not saying that this is evidence of many of these King of the Monsters reviews being of low opinions. High subjective opinions are far more likely to be unique, depending on the influences directing the thoughts of the opinionator. High objective opinions, on the other hand, will very well produce similar results. The difference is more likely to be in the depth of the opinions rather than the direction. And this is where my supposedly far out take on the doubled narrative tripling of King of the Monsters ends up being reproduced separately in someone else's video. All the evidence is present in the film, you just have to pay attention to see it. Although we do end up with slightly different conclusions.
I mean, we even have Emma again, because in many ways she is the human equivalent of Mothra. At first we think of her as this big monster representing only gruesome destruction, but then at the end we finally see her for the kind benevolent soul she truly is, when she sacrifices herself in a moment that is the exact reverse of the earlier moment that first painted her as a monster.
As the film progresses, Emma switches sides twice, going from Monarch to Alan Jonah and back again. As her choices take root, so too do Mothra and Rodan do their parts. At the start of the film, right after Emma is introduced, Mothra births from her egg. When Emma is kidnapped / goes with Jonah, Mothra goes into hiding. When Emma reveals she is working with the terrorists, Rodan crawls out of his hiding place. As Ghidorah begins to wreck the planet, Emma submits to Jonah's judgment about not doing anything about it, just as Rodan bows to the false king. We even get this visual to cement the comparison. Mothra emerges from her cocoon about the same time as Madison is enacting Emma's plan. After Emma has pulled a gun on Jonah and has set off to save her daughter, the fire demon and the queen of the monsters come into conflict. Mothra defeats Rodan as Emma embraces her family. Mothra dies defending Godzilla against Ghidorah, buying him time to recover. Minutes later, Emma is doing the exact same thing. But the matter of the objective and subjective doesn't stop there. I have said before I'm a fan of the live stream EFAP and their hosts Mauler, Fringy and longtime guest Rags. I've already mentioned them in this video regards their watch together of King of the Monsters, which was singularly odd for them. EFAP and the hosts are standard bearers of objective opinions, normally going in depth regards this nitpick or that neat pick and how they affect this, that and the other. They even enact this high standard of criticism on other YouTubers, as seen here in one of their more beloved episodes.
Breaking out of the cop car, seemingly by coincidence in the middle of the mob. I just wish
seemingly by coincidence.
I can't believe she said that. Like,
I cannot believe this. How did you fucking watch the film, woman?
Because murderers do get attention. You could make it this whole media meta commentary. Like, he kills those.
As if there wasn't media meta commentary.
There wasn't. Did you miss the long pan out showing all the screens that had them talking about what happened?
Did she miss all the papers sensationalizing his killings?
Did she miss the movie?
It can just be like, he's not supposed to make sense.
No, that's not what we said.
It
That's not what we said, so...
He definitely does make sense.
It's not supposed to make
We're not
sense.
fucking talking about Godzilla.
So when they didn't do that for their watch together of King of the Monsters and instead produced something more in line with CinemaSins than EFAP, I was taken aback. Even worse when they kept using straw men to support their opinions. I was taken aback even more when, during my research, I watched Movie Bob's videos of King of the Monsters.
And now King of the Monsters is... Holy shit, guys, this movie is so goddamn good. Yeah! Now, are there more details and technical nuance I could delve into? I mean, sure, yeah, it's really quite a spectacularly well-made film, and in the written version of this, I imagine I will, but what no academic analysis can properly convey is that Godzilla King of the Monsters is a transcendent, elevating, purely cinematic experience. It's the Avengers of giant monster movies.
This is more like what I was expecting to see. What I wasn't expecting was this.
That having been said, look, there's plenty of reasons for this not to be up your alley, but having seen the thing several times now, it's my considered take that if you're calling this a stupid movie or even not especially a thoughtful film, you had to decide not to pay attention to it, because if there are two things this movie does not lack for other than big-ass monsters, it's characters and things on its mind.
Did you fucking watch the film, woman?
You had to decide not to pay attention to it.
Cinema Roberto was unwittingly pulling an EFAP on EFAP. This realization made me start to think that King of the Monsters was some kind of media vortex where reality warps and splinters. That's the only way I can explain why so many of the opinions on this film are just plain wrong, and why reviewers I wouldn't expect to get the film were so on point. Unfortunately, this isn't some bizarre alternate reality I've slipped into. These are the actual reviews, and they have very real consequences that go beyond making me wish I hadn't started researching this video. Earlier, I mentioned adaptations and how they are inherently different from the original media they are adapting. I also mentioned how critics tend to ignore this little factoid. This lack of awareness isn't just annoying to listen to in isolation, but can have far-reaching effects that these reviewers don't grasp.
Idiots will tell other idiots about it because at this point there's nothing impressive about visual effects. Now it's just a bunch of crap all over the screen made by computer animators that wish they chose other careers. Some kind of uncut special effects shot involving models and precise timing and actual camera work would have been impressive. So what? It's a few minutes of a CGI battle sequence some guy renders on his computer. So if you were impressed by that, then you've been punked.
Really cool looking. I like how when it shows his feet stepping and things are just melting.
Yeah.
That was
Before
really
he even
cool.
gets to them, they're melting.
Yeah, although at that point, even though it looked so cool and he looked so mean at that point, it was still like there is so much CG. Like you're just looking at a completely computer-generated image. Yeah. I'm just tired of looking at something that looks like a video game.
Yeah. I mean, when you look like an early 2000s video game character, it's just not good. It's not looking good, guys. I mean, you could easily put some makeup on an actress, some prosthetics, juice her up a little bit, and then make her taller somehow in post. Or maybe do like the funny thing they did with the original Hulk show from the 70s and have it be a completely different actress playing She-Hulk. They could easily do that, but they just choose not to and just throw some CGI at it, whatever.
For an example, look at Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Introduced as Iron Man's protege, his student, his
I'm sorry, I'm confused as to the relationship here. I mean, what is he, your ward?
No.
Peter Parker was a welcome addition to the MCU, but there were those who declared he wasn't Spider-Man because he wasn't poor, he didn't have the well-known phrase, so on and so forth. So after 5 films, Spider-Man No Way Home set out to make the MCU Peter Parker into the Spider-Man a vocal few wanted. They had to do some significant damage to the world and the characters to do so, but at least those complaining about him got what they wanted. Unfortunately, the monsterverse in which King of the Monsters sits has already suffered a similar fate. Despite Godzilla King of the Monsters being a homage to the Godzilla franchise, drawing many, many aspects from every corner of its history into one fantastic story, the reviewers I've referenced here, and others like them, were incredibly negative about it. And so Godzilla vs. Kong scrapped the deeper themes and well thought through storylines, and instead smashed monsters together without the least bit of care. I've given my opinion on the film, and will do so again, let me warn you now. Under no circumstances do I want to look up reviews of Godzilla vs. Kong. The King of the Monsters reviews gave me a headache. I dread to think what the Godzilla vs. Kong ones will do. At some point I might go through these reviews individually and pick apart their criticisms, if I feel like annoying myself even further. But to round up this examination of bad reviews of a great film, it mostly comes down to having their own homegrown idea of what a Godzilla film should be, and judging King of the Monsters based on that idea. Not paying attention to parts of the film the reviewer has decided don't matter. and worst of all, allowing completely subjective opinions to obscure or even wipe out objective ones. Reviews and reviewers like these are frustratingly hollow to listen to. Worse, they can be damaging to the future prospects of promising franchises if anyone listens to them. Cough, Godzilla vs. Kong, cough. It also makes me wonder why certain people are so popular when what they have to say is so wrong. After all this negativity, I want to offer a ray of hope and end the video with some positivity. Despite Godzilla vs. Kong's turning to the camp side, a new television series is in the works. The basic premise? A family discovers their connection to the Titans. Family drama in Godzilla media? If King of the Monsters is anything to go by, it's a good sign. There's also a new film on the way, no details yet, but given what the TV series is doing, we can but hope. I'm certainly crossing my fingers. Thank you for watching this video. This hasn't been the most positive of videos, but I hope that little bit at the end made up for it. After doing all this, I've got a few ideas for future projects, including a Great Joy style video for Godzilla vs. Kong, although not necessarily a joy, as well as one for Shin Gojira, maybe, possibly. Until then, feel free to like, share and subscribe. Hell, pop over to my Patreon and throw a quid my way if you can. If you fancy something weird and shiny, go visit my Etsy store. Links for that and my Patreon in the description. Once again, thank you for watching.